afternoon. On behalf of the trustees of the Cleveland City Club and the trustees of the City Club Foundation, I want to extend to all of you a warm and a cordial welcome to our regular Friday forum. Our speaker today is a world-famous cardiologist who will be speaking to us on realistic reality on healing your heart. And I'm sure that all of you have one, or maybe two. Dr. Herman K. Hellerstein has been associated with the Medical School of Case West Reserve University here in Cleveland for over 50 years. He's a heart specialist, researcher, teacher, and the author of more than 20 books. Widely, he is known as the father of cardiac rehabilitation. Dr. Hellerstein has represented the United States at World Health Conferences. He has been elected to leadership positions in the American Heart Association and has been widely honored with professional awards. Dr. Herman K. Hellerstein honors us with his presence here today at the City Club. Ladies and gentlemen, will you join me in welcoming this outstanding physician?
Mr. Gray, Mr. Taft, Alan Davis, and many friends of many years' duration. I'm very careful not to say old friends, and a few patients. I really appreciate this opportunity of addressing the City Club and to share the same podium that was used by many prominent individuals in the past, including Democrats and Republicans, Jimmy Carter, Ronnie Reagan, in their quest for their presidency. I have to admit the only office I ever sought was 60 years ago for the presidency of the student body of Shaker Heights High School, which I fortunately lost despite the managerial skills of Billy Evans, later very active participant in the affairs of the City Club. However, I have campaigned for many, many years in different podiums. I'm not sure it's podiums or podii, for an understanding of the foremost cause of death in the United States, that is coronary disease, and for its control and its eventual conquest. This may sound radical, but I can state that this scourge, much greater than AIDS, this epidemic of coronary disease is coming under control. When it peaked in about 1950 to 1960, its control has not occurred fast enough to suit us. Coronary disease accounted for only 14% of the deaths in the United States in 1900, and presently is responsible for more than half of the deaths in the United States. The ominous, terrible facts are that over 3 million people have coronary disease, of whom 600,000 die each year from this dreadful affliction. And of course, the economic impact is fantastic. Despite this horrendous aspect of high mortality, how can I talk about the conquest? The point is the death rate from coronary disease has decreased over 30% in the last 15 years. 30%. What a terrible problem Social Security has now. Most of us who should have died are living longer. The prevalence is high, despite the undisputed knowledge that the disease can be diagnosed early, it can be modified, it can be halted, it can be stopped, and a large portion of it can be reversed. What a sad situation to know so much and to obviously understand there's a gap between what is known and what is done. In fact, there's a dissociation I call the HB dissociation. The brain knows one thing and the hand does something else. Whether it's drinking and driving, whether it's eating excessively, whether it's using the poison called tobacco, the brain knows it's bad, but the hand does it. And the answer is not to chop off the hand. The incidence of coronary disease is so high that it surpasses any other disease or injury, including those which are afflicted and caused by war, and of course not that trivial little 100-hour war, or AIDS that has stricken adults in modern times. It outranks tuberculosis, and at the height of tuberculosis in the 19th century, when the Great White Plague, and the word white does not refer to race, but the White Plague was the nation's #1 killer. Because of the color of the lesion, when you cut an artery of a person who's died with coronary disease, you see that beautiful yellow material that is exactly the egg, yellow of the egg and the fat of a marbled steak. Probably because it is yellow, we should probably call this the yellow plague because of the suffering caused by this epidemic of coronary disease. We should call this the scourge of the 20th century, one which is self-inflicted by modern, hypokinetic, sloppy, slovenly, soft way of living. I hope that excites you. The disease AIDS is entering the horizon of the late 20th century and the early 21st century, and it probably will get similar connotations in the future. In facing this problem, we can benefit from the lessons of the past, where scourges of similar magnitude, and I'm referring to the plague, to syphilis, which used to be called by the French the Italian disease, and by the Italians the French disease, famine, smallpox, have been brought under control because the prerequisites for such success were as follows. One, there had to be universal recognition that the problem exists and that it's important. Two, there's available knowledge how to deal with the problem. And three, societal action. Society has to get off its fatty acids, as it were. That pun is Irving Page's phrase, fatty acids, ACIDS. But I've also may refer to another part of the anatomy. So society action is necessary to use the resources that are available. The enemy atherosclerosis, and to define it, it would be nice to have slides, but verbally, let me draw a picture. It's due to the accumulation in the walls of the arteries of other organs of foamy cells, of fat, which includes cholesterol and crystals, connective tissue, smooth muscle cells, and blood clotting elements. Through this accumulation, it's like rust in pipes, the blood supply of the heart muscle itself is reduced, and it produces changes in the function of the heart, its circulation, and it produces signs and, unfortunately, very few symptoms, and the symptomatology depends upon the pain threshold of each individual. I bring this up because in combat, I was with a tank battalion. I took care of people who had the same wound. Some wanted last rites, and the others say, hey, doc, I got $1 million wound, I'm going home. So the tolerance to symptoms, to signs are different. The unfortunate part is that arteriosclerotic disease precedes the clinical manifestation by many, many years, for which reason coronary heart disease is now called the silent disease. It's like the fact that a woman who has cancer of the breast, a lump that is maybe a ½ inch in size, that cancer has been present for 8 months of a year before it is detected. It's a silent disease. For example, in a postmortem study of American soldiers killed in the Korean War, these kids were 21 years of age, 77% showed significant involvement of the coronary arteries, and over half the artery was more than 50% narrowed, 21-year-old kids. And furthermore, an airplane that overshot LaGuardia, autopsies were done on the passengers there, and again, about 70% of these innocent passengers in an airplane crash had coronary disease. And unfortunately, the first manifestation of this is sudden cardiac death. In addition to the morbidity and sickness, see, morbidity is when you're sick, and mortality is when you die. Not you, but somebody else. It's probable that 18 million people in the United States have all types of heart disease put together. The economic cost of heart disease can be measured in terms of what it costs to diagnose it, to treat it, to rehabilitate. Treatment includes such things, and I understand Floyd Loop was here a little while ago for bypass surgery, which was almost 254,000 people in the United States are undergoing bypass surgery. 300,000 are going through angioplasty, where a balloon is put in to dilate the blood vessels, plus the losses from work, etc. So it's enormous. The cost is estimated to be $25 billion. That's probably about 10 days cost in the Gulf? I'm not quite sure, maybe a little bit more. The total mortality of the armed forces in that terrible war, War 2.5 of Vietnam, there were 39,000 Americans died. In comparison, there were 5 million deaths due to coronary disease in the same period. Obviously, more money is spent on the military than is spent on fighting the battle against coronary disease. To look at it from a positive standpoint, the greatest accomplishment that's taken place as far as heart disease is concerned, we now understand what makes it occur. This is the first prerequisite to understand it. Hardening of the arteries is now known to be a disease which is not inevitable, does not always associate itself with aging. Many of us can get older and older and eventually old without having arteriosclerosis. It's predictable and it's preventable. What are these risk factors? And I'll briefly review them. These risk factors are factors found in people who are thought to be healthy, free of clinical disease, which are associated with a greater likelihood that they're going to develop the disease subsequently. What are they? The major risk factors are being a man. You know, they say it's a man's world in his wife's name. Being a man or a postmenopausal woman. When nature blows the whistle, the woman becomes more masculine. People who have increased amounts of fat in the blood, particularly in the form of cholesterol and the so-called bad cholesterol called LDL cholesterol, and triglycerides. Almost always that high fat is due to putting too much fat into your diet. The weight of a man's heart, it should be a woman's too, weight of a man's heart is through the stomach. How true. 3 is high blood pressure, which is controllable. 4, the use of the poison called, and I always ask the audience, what is the most common poison used today? Cigarettes, and form of nicotine. And 5 is a sedentary, sloppy, indolent lifestyle. There are other factors that are important, such as how much fiber in the diet, soft water, the use of sugar, and so-called personality type A, which is wrong, of course. Now, when people are evaluated for these risk factors, it's possible to predict with frightening accuracy who's going to develop the disease. If a person has 2 or 3 risk factors, within the next 10 years, you or other people have a chance of 1 in 2 that they're going to develop heart disease. Now let's talk about the cholesterol connection. Despite Thomas Moore, who wrote a very exciting article in the Atlantic Monthly saying that this was a myth, he was wrong. I think he was intellectually dishonest. He didn't present the picture right, but he served a useful purpose to bringing it up to attention. There's no question that the level of cholesterol in the blood determines whether you're going to develop heart disease. Experimentally, it's been shown that they can produce the disease in almost every experimental animal you want, meaning monkeys and dogs and chickens and humans. The process can be produced, accelerated, slowed down, and reversed, not only in these animal studies, but also in humans. Regression, this is the word that's important. What is it? That's the reversal of this atherosclerotic process. Has it only occurred recently? Not at all. It's been occurring for centuries, but has not been recognized. There have been ups and downs as these fatty plaques are filled into the artery. And depending upon the conditions of the individual, those fatty plaques, those foamy cells, fatty foam cells, can be reduced. These plaques are like mounds of rust in pipes. They can progress finally to being firm and hard and built up and calcified. Calcium is the same stuff found in cement, and finally cause distress. Sometimes symptoms, heart attacks, as I mentioned, sudden cardiac death. This dynamic process was described as long ago as 1924 when Aschoff showed in Europe that certain diets produced damage to the arteries. During World War I and World War II, one of the beneficial observations was that coronary disease began to drop. So much so that in the occupied countries of Europe, particularly in Holland, for example, where good data are available, when the Germans requisitioned the fat for the Vaterland, that's almost a pun, the body fat went down, heart disease practically disappeared, and 8 months after the war was over, it reoccurred. And pathologists who were doing autopsies at that time found that the disease had decreased during the war occupation, despite the emotional stress, etc. In Holland, you were lucky. You didn't have petrol for a car. But if you had a bicycle with working tires, you could at least use the bicycle. In my own personal experience, I was with the troops in World War II that liberated Belsen-Bergen concentration camps, and I found that people who had had coronary disease, despite the horrendous aspects of the furnaces and the murder that the Germans were inflicting upon these people, that their symptoms had disappeared. I happened to have the experience that a year or 2 or 3 years later, I saw some of these people as patients right here in Cleveland, and they had regained the body fatness, the body weight, and they regained the symptoms. And I told them, go home, pretend that you were in a concentration camp, except there are no furnaces, no fires, no graves, and go back to a low-fat, low-cholesterol diet. Now, this saga of arteriosclerosis is worthwhile because it portrays our ignorance as well as our success. First of all, it was, number one, they failed to recognize that its presence was significant. The great Sir William Osler in 1905 did not think that the lesions found in people who had died with coronary disease that was significant clinically. And then finally in 1916, Herrick found that he could diagnose a heart attack by using the electrocardiogram, and from that time it became easier to recognize it. I might ask you in the audience, how many of you have had an electrocardiogram within the past year? Raise your hand. We're getting there. How many of you have had an automobile license in the past year? Which is more important? Okay. An epidemiologic studies show that you can predict it. The interventions were first in this way. We thought we were very good to prevent sudden cardiac death. That's opening the chest, massaging the heart, arrhythmias. Then we gave medicine to dissolve clots, which actually reduced the mortality rate. Then we said, let's improve the function. So even if you've lost, pardon 1 second. That's terrible. Even if you lost one finger, you can teach the other 9 fingers to work well. So we were able to enhance the function of the residual muscle. And then there was a development of heart surgery, and I must mention people like Claude Beck, and later the also-rans that followed him. Then it was possible to restore the blood supply to a certain extent, and that wasn't good enough because finally the risk factors were diagnosed and then action to develop to prevent it and to cause regression. I have to bring up that when we began to propose 30 years ago that we could reverse arteriosclerosis, it was mind-boggling, and I was told it was outrageous. It was outrageous. And I bring this up because it occurred. This involved basic science. And I'm reminded that when Humphrey, not Hubert, the other Humphrey, was Secretary of Treasury in Eisenhower's regime in 1954, he pooh-poohed the importance of basic research. And he said, basic science, pooh. Why, that's like trying to answer the question, can you unfry an egg? What a fantastically profound statement, to unfry an egg, to change a protein that's coagulated to a liquid form. If you could change the protein in the arteries and vessels of an old person to become young and elastic. But he didn't realize how profound his poo-poo was. Actually, in 1933, my professor of chemistry, Frank Havorka, in talking to our second-year class in college, said, here are 3 current impossibilities in 1933. 1, to release the energy of the atom. 2, to create life or protein. And 3, to reverse time. And if you knew Frank Havorka, he looked at us, the class, with a twinkle in his eye, and he said, who of you will address these challenges? Well, we know, of course, that the energy has been released from the atom. 2 is proteins have already been synthesized, which is the first step to increasing life and producing life. And 3rd, we have not yet been able to reverse time, chronologic time, despite Star Trek and fiction and science fiction, but we can reverse physiologic time. Meaning as people get older, they usually become less fit, and we've shown that we can make old people physically as young people. So there's still some doubters, and I mentioned Thomas Moore, or you probably saw yesterday or day before yesterday's 10-second squib on television saying that there was an 80-year-old man who ate 25 eggs a day for the last 10 years and he didn't have coronary disease. Well, they did metabolic studies on this unusual person and found that while he ate those eggs, he didn't absorb them In addition, his body turned down its own rate of synthesis of cholesterol, and he escaped as yet. But of course, I must remind you, this old man had Alzheimer's disease and was demented. Now, this gap between what's known and done exists not only in the physicians, but also among the public. For example, in a survey of physician practices, 33% of patients seen by physicians within the past 6 months were not routinely advised about their diet or weight control. 34% were not advised regarding the importance of exercise. 60% of the women were not advised as to the need for mammograms. Obviously, there's a terrible unfulfilled gap between what is known and what is done. Now, what are the landmarks of severity? And there's no question that if one uses a level of 200 milligrams per DL of cholesterol, the risk starts to go up. The risk below that is very, very low. Or the bad cholesterol called LDL cholesterol, it shouldn't go above 120. It's easy to measure. For my information, how many of you have had your total cholesterol or HDL cholesterol or LDL cholesterol or triglycerides measured within the last 2 years? Raise your hands. Hooray. Now we're getting there. And the rest of you who didn't, you're laggards. Now, the work of Nobel laureates Brown and Goldstein in Texas and other scientists have told us how this works. That bad cholesterol called LDL cholesterol is oxidized, meaning it combines with oxygen, and it comes to the blood vessels, to the inside there, and it irritates the lining of the vessels. It causes, almost like a cancer, it causes smooth muscle to grow. It produces this plaque which obstructs it. Now, what's interesting, this was basic science for which Nobel Prizes were awarded, but it's found that there's a dump truck, as it were, called HDL cholesterol. It's able, when it increases, it goes to these areas and causes a transport, a reverse transport, and can unload these fatty plaques. By the way, the event preceded the explanation. We showed this years ago this happened, but the understanding of why it occurred. So, in essence, we know that it's reversible. The question is, if it occurred so frequently, why wasn't it recognized before? It's interesting, 30-some years ago, my associates and I studied a group of people who had died from inanition, who had cancer with metastases or from tuberculosis or anorexia nervosa, and we found evidence of reversal of atherosclerosis. And at that time, I wrote prophetically that perhaps selective undernutrition would have a clinical application to reverse heart disease. And today, we know this is the case. Now, there are many myths that occur today. It's impossible to dispel them, one of which is if you lower your cholesterol, you'll develop cancer. And that's as recent within the last month. And it's no question that is not true. It's the other way around. People who will develop cancer of the colon, for example, have been studied, as it were, over a period of time, 6 or 8 months before that. What happens is the cholesterol starts to go down because in the gene of people who have susceptibility for cancer of the colon, what's called the locus, right near there, there's another part of that gene which turns on the body to produce more LDL receptors to bring it down. Some smart man or woman is going to find out how to get that gene and give it to people just to lower the cholesterol itself. So, in essence, lowering the cholesterol does not produce cancer. Then there's a question, should you do this anyway because it'll create anxiety? Just think, if you measured cholesterol in everybody, there can be some people whose cholesterol will not be elevated or elevated and won't be as significant for other reasons, particularly if they're females. Women, fortunately, develop their coronary disease about 10 to 15 years later than men because they have high HDL cholesterol, which is good. And furthermore, once nature blows the whistle and menopause occurs, then those women began to behave like men. So, is there evidence that arteriosclerosis is reversed in addition to what I've said? Yes. There have been studies done in Finland, Holland, and the United States where people who have so-called normal coronary arteries have been given drugs or have been put on a diet or given a bile sequestration which holds on to the bile that prevents cholesterol from being reabsorbed. And they've also done studies on humans where they've taken coronary arteriograms before and after intervention, randomized one half into yes, this intervention, the other just going on their own sinful ways. This is prospective, and there's no question that arteriosclerosis is reversed, showing a coronary disease. The question, though, is is the draconian approach necessary to be on a true vegetarian diet with no chicken, no fish, no milk, no eggs, no taste. Is it necessary to go on that? The answer is no. For the last 7 or 8 years, since 1982, I've been going to China as a consultant to the National Heart and Lung and Blood Institute, and there in China, people eat 20% fat calories, most of which come from non-animal source. From age 18 to 80, their cholesterol goes from 160 to 180, and if you take 100,000 people aged, say, 40 to 80, we in the United States would have 6 times as many heart attacks as they have in China for 100,000 people. So the draconian approach is not necessary. In the research studies, people whose cholesterol were 300 to start with intervention, it came down to 250 cholesterol, and there was regression. And the regression is only 15 to 20% of the lesions, but that's not bad. In our own studies, and some of you in the audience have participated in these studies, we have studied people who have coronary disease, and this was done almost 30 years ago. And we put them in an intervention program, and they're not dying now the way they're supposed to. Ordinarily, people with coronary disease were dying at the rate of 6 per 100 per year. 50% were dead, 60% were dead in 8 years or 10 years. Today, in our series of people with intervention, after a heart attack, they're dying at the rate of 1.92 per 100 per year, 2 per 100 people per year, which means the average person in the intervention program, usually they were about 55 years old or 50 years old, half of them are going to live another 25 years. And you obviously know that this prolonged survival has produced an unexpected burden on the Social Security system, and it's a welcome problem for future politicians to handle. I hope someone right here to deal with this problem, what to do with these long-living individuals. Now the question is about guilt. How much guilt should you have, and I personalize you, if you have been listening, and if you know, and if you accept, and if you have violated your body, and if you have a family history of heart disease or stroke, and if you have high blood fat, and if you have blood pressures not regulated, and if you are sloppy and indolent, and if you use a poison called tobacco, should you feel guilty in this present age? Yes, you should. This is a burden. It's important because this is self-inflicted. It's self-inflicted. Now, the point is, so if you have done all these evil things, should you give up? And the answer is no, because it's still reversible in large part. In essence, it's never too late to start secondary preventive programs. The concept of personal guilt is very important because people who develop AIDS, I'm not talking about those who innocently had a transfusion which was contaminated, should they feel guilty about their own personal hazardous behavior? And the answer is yes. That doesn't mean they shouldn't be given help and treatment, but they bear a guilt. So I ask, what are you going to do about it? Are we winning? Yes. Can you imagine that individuals like Sokolov, who has been advertising, he himself had a heart attack as a young man. He's bombarded the newspapers and radio and television with advertisements saying, "You are killing us," referring to McDonald's, Wendy's, and others. He lambasted them so much, and he's been written up recently this way. He's had so much of an impact that McDonald's and other purveyors of fast food are changing the time of fat that's being used in preparing their foods, and happily, their salad bars and happy places like burgers and others are now broiling chicken. So we have been able to change public behavior by personal assaults against the enemy. In summary, the hope is that coronary disease will be truly conquered. It's inexcusable to have 600,000 people die each year. At least 200,000 or 300,000 of those should have lived another 10 years. And I bring this up because it's not bad to die, but it's bad to die prematurely. And certainly with the idea of living 10 or 15 more years, then one can face the specter of Alzheimer's disease or other dementia. I hope that the forthcoming generation of medical students are going to face what we face in a different way. When I started medical school 50-some years ago, 77% of our students were tested for a tuberculin reaction. Well, 100% were tested, and 77 had a positive reaction. In essence, we have been exposed to tuberculosis clinically or subclinically. Today, medical students, when tested, 3% only have a positive test for tuberculin, and those 3% are given treatment as if they had the active disease. My expectation is that the same thing is going to happen for the next generation, namely, the next generation, that when the students look through the data, they'll find that coronary disease is as rare as it was in World War II during the German occupation. It's likely that we're going to hear a lot more about this scourge once AIDS gets off the headlines, because the public appreciates the substantial reduction in mortality rate from acute heart attacks. In fact, we know instead of being in the hospital for 6 weeks after a heart attack, that we reduced it to 4 weeks, to 3 weeks, to 2 weeks. And now when a person comes in the beginning phase of a heart attack, we are able to study them, we dissolve the clots, we dilate the vessels, and then we put them on a strict program of secondary prevention, and they're home with a week, 5 days, 7 days from 6 weeks' time. The public appreciates that. We hope that this is going to occur. When Lyndon Johnson in 1964 established a commission, and I was fortunate to serve on it, a commission to control heart disease, cancer, and stroke, it seemed as if it were a dream. We already know that part of the dream, at least as far as stroke is concerned, and of coronary disease, is being realized. The public now has to realize, to recapitulate, that coronary disease is no longer an answer to overpopulation. Why? Because it smites people who have already completed their reproductive activity. Rarely does it involve people in the 20s and 30s. The prerequisites for the control of the scourge of coronary disease are being fulfilled. What are they? 1, there's a wide recognition and acceptance that the problem exists, and that's significant. 2, there's enough knowledge today to deal with this problem in a logical, unemotional fashion in a public health standpoint. 3, societal action to develop and use the resources which are available is commencing. And 4, there's unequivocal acceptance that a large part of arteriosclerosis can be reversed, essentially equivalent to what Secretary Humphrey's concept was of basic science. Remember, unfrying the egg. And by the way, we still do not know how to unfry the egg, but we sure can reverse arteriosclerosis. Thank you.
Take your seat. I'll make a few announcements. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, the City Club has presented today Dr. Herman Hellerstein, who's been talking to us about everything you want to know about the heart. Dr. Hellerstein, I have looked over many an audience this year, and I have failed to find one that is attentive to your lecture 101 of advice to these people. It's just been fascinating, and you have presented a very serious subject in a most meaningful way. I imagine your students enjoy sitting before you to have this highly scientific discussion in a manner that you can understand. Most of you did, I could tell by the nod of your head. Before we go into our regular question period, there are a few announcements that I would like to make. The first one is to suggest that all of you who are not members of this marvelous institution become members. We need your support to carry on these magnificent learning sessions. Again, this week, the students are absent, unfortunately, because they're still in their spring break. But I know they would have enjoyed you as much as we had if they were here. Next Friday at our regular forum time, our speaker will be the Chairman and CEO of Continental Airlines, Hollis L. Harris, speaking on air service in the future of Cleveland and the United States. Then 2 weeks from today, the City Club is proud again this year to sponsor, as we have for the past 19 years now, the annual high school debating finals. We have found these to be extremely interesting in the past. This year, the debate is between Orange High School and St. Ignatius. This year, the national debate topic is resolved that showing disrespect for the American flag is antithetical. Take note, antithetical to fundamental American values. So next week, air travel, and in 2 weeks, burning the flag. Make your reservations very, very soon. Now, we have 2 microphones for the questioners, one in the front by Alan Davis and one in the rear by Lillian Anderson. As I have suggested in the past, confine your time to a question, and if you must make a speech, see me. I'll refer you to any one of our forum members or special program members, and they'll schedule you at another time and perhaps at another place. Dr. Hellerstein.
Sir, would it not be an answer to the problem of dietary cholesterol and dietary saturated fatty acids to simply have the medical profession lobby with the Congress, the senators and the representatives in Congress, simply to make it illegal for any farmer ever to sell anything which has saturated fatty acids in or cholesterol? I mean, that's consistent with, say, thoughts about banning North Carolina from growing tobacco. Would that not be a considerable answer?
Oh, that's a horrible, horrible idea. There are not lousy foods, there are lousy diets. Well, I think it'd be a terrible thing. There are some benefits to various substances, and I believe in the joie de vivre. There is obviously a need for variation. I believe in debauchery about once a year. As a matter of fact, some people have it recurrent, chronic, intermittent, and relapsing. But seriously, my associates and I, when we go to the arteriosclerosis meeting of the American Heart Association once a year, I will eat a visible egg just to prove that I know what it tastes like. Of course, there are eggs and other things. No, I think I thought you were going to indicate we should lobby, which we have done, that foods should be properly labeled. For example, it's a terrible thing for a food to be advertised as being cholesterol-free, and they have palm kernel oil or coconut oil as part of the oil, and that's just as bad as because it predisposes to the development of formation of cholesterol in the body. No, I'm against outlawing food. I think we need to educate people rather than to outlaw it. And obviously it's changing. For example, skim milk today is being sold widely. When I was a boy living out in the country, they used to throw skim milk to the hogs. Now we do. But so, I mean, we eat them. Yes.
Except for spring vacation, there would be a group of high school students here to meet with you today. Now, these students are young. Our audience here have children and grandchildren who are the same age. What would you recommend that these people do so that they will not become the heart statistics you've been talking about?
Well, first of all, the kids are smarter than we were. Because, first place, there's no question that children today are more physically active, that they're watching their diet. With our 6 children in the various universities, it's impressive how many of the universities have special arrangements for salads, etc. But the point is, it's a social class phenomenon. It's a social class phenomenon. People of upper social class, referring to education, etc., are leaner, more exercise, lower cholesterol, they live long. The big problem, and this is a terrible problem, the problem is how do you get to people of the lower socioeconomic class. I remember attending the White House Conference on Nutrition with General Benjamin Davis, who was here in Cleveland at that time, and this conference was on malnutrition and undernutrition, and it was remarkable that somebody got up, it was a big fat woman who happened to be black, and she said 20 million people go to bed every night hungry? And General Benjamin Davis sit next to me say, yes, and all of them are fat. The point is, it's hard. It's hard. America is the USA is the only country in the world where poor people are fat. It's a matter of teaching them. We were told at that conference the Hispanic men don't want their women thin. So there's a matter of education. We did studies on children in the inner city, Shaker, Cleveland Heights, and Exurbia, and we found the children in the inner city were fatter, smoked more, ate more fatty foods, ate more food in the fast food places. Their health was bad. The time to begin is with the adults as to what they eat at home. I think in the Song of Solomon or whatnot, some places said, raise up a child and away it will go and won't depart from it. You're right. But there's no question that there is progress being made, but it basically is a problem of the education of the lower social class.
Dr. Hellerstein, in your talk, I think on at least 3 occasions you mentioned the poison of tobacco. Yet, as a government, we continue to subsidize the tobacco industry. We have large billboard advertisements extolling tobacco. To what extent do you personally feel, and to what extent are the heart associations and the medical groups in favor of taking some really draconian was the word you used, action regarding the tobacco industry? And I'm thinking even of the period of time that you and I remember of even alcohol when we had a prohibition. Would you be willing to go that far regarding tobacco?
No, I'm against the poison called tobacco. I think the tobacco industry should start raising nicotine for killing insects instead of people. By the way, it is a good poison, but we're making progress. 47% of Americans used to smoke cigarettes. In certain groups, it's about down to 8 or 10%. So progress being made. No, I think the point is there has to be alternative products that the tobacco people can raise with, so they have a cash product. Certainly, the fact that radio and television banned cigarette advertisements has had an important role. By the way, in Europe, 70 to 75% of people who develop coronary disease are smoking. So we've made considerable progress, but not enough. I don't like the idea that government should decide what you're going to do. In the final analysis, each one of us has responsibility from what we put in our hand and put in our mouth. And that responsibility is there. We can educate the public, educate the students, but I'm against that type of banning. I think probably a cigarette or a cigar once a year at the wedding or the birth of a grandchild is probably all right.
Dr. Hellerstein,
Yes, sir.
when you listed the risk factors for coronary artery disease, you didn't mention family history. Should we infer from this that that is much less important than the other items that you did mention?
Oh, I must apologize. I should have listed that. Oh, yes. The family history is extremely important in this sense that those who have a premature development of coronary artery disease or heart disease or stroke or gout or diabetes, this is very important. But if your family history is excellent, and if your parents lived to the 90s, etc., don't bet on it, because your life is different from theirs. They didn't have refrigerators. They didn't have elevators. They didn't have automobiles. They couldn't store fatty foods in the refrigerator. The foods were not manipulated as they are now. So don't bet on your ancestry to protect you. But by all means, it is important. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. Family history is so well known, so that don't ignore it. Neither the favorable, unfavorable aspect. You have the opportunity. If you have a family history of premature development of heart disease, you can change your family history for your children. As a matter of fact, there's several people in the audience, or friends of several of my patients in the audience here, where 2 brothers in their 40s enter to my care. One accepts the idea of intervention, the other not. And no male in that family ever lived beyond 45. Today, this one who went through the intervention program, he's now 74, 75 years old. The brother, as a match control, as it were, died 2 or 3 years after the study because he didn't believe it. So it's important. It's important to know that family history is important, but you have it within your capacity to change your children's family history, at least for 1 generation.
I appreciate very much your very informative
presentation, but there were two things you didn't mention, aspirin and caffeine. I've been taking aspirin for the last 50 years. 10 years ago, I had a triple bypass. Now, is there a limit if you take too much aspirin? Because I see ads in the magazines, a child's portion of aspirin will prevent a heart attack daily. Not heart attack daily, but the aspirin daily. And the other, there's a lot of controversy on decaf coffee and regular coffee.
All right. First of all, about the aspirin, that's a wonderful story. A general practitioner down in Texas treating people with arthritis over many years noticed that they didn't die from heart disease as much as others, and was poo-pooed at first, but found that aspirin, which is a fantastic drug, so powerful, it should probably be sold at $1 or $5 a tablet. And Bayer's and others made a mistake when they sold it so cheaply. It is anti-inflammatory, it reduces the temperature, and it changes how cells get together and stick. And there's no question that an aspirin a day, or a baby aspirin called 80 milligrams, will produce some beneficial effect. Namely, it will reduce the number of heart attacks. But this did not produce regression. It just prevents further progression of the event. And the argument whether it's baby aspirin or 325 milligrams aspirin, that's being resolved by prospective studies. When it comes to caffeine, there's a big debate still going on because unfortunately it's hard to separate. The average person who's having a cup of coffee, what's in the coffee? Sugar and cream. And then in addition to that, when you have some coffee, what you're apt to do is have a high-fat, high-cholesterol, tasty morsel called a donut. So you have to factor that out. Then the question is also how many cups of coffee. There's no question that people who drink 5 or 10 cups of coffee a day have bigger problems because in coffee there's caffeine, and that stimulates the system, and about 6% out of 100, 6 people out of 100 who drink that much coffee will have irregularities of the heartbeat, and if they have underlying heart disease, that may precipitate a significant heart attack. When it comes to decaf coffee, that study was done in Europe, and their preparation of coffee was a little different from ours. I think, by and large, it's so trivial compared to the major problem. In other words, if you eat an egg or eat eggs or high-fat, high-cholesterol, the coffee factor is a small factor. It's almost the same order, significant when you tell your children when they cross the street, do you keep both eyes open or one eye? But I would not discourage people from drinking coffee if it's black. It's not necessary to put a sweetener in. I'm not against sugar because that has been overrated, that having a little sugar for coffee, I don't use sugar myself, but I would say be reasonable about how much coffee. I was on Wide Wide World when David, I forget who it was the host. I went to New York in preparation of the program, and they had pretty girls wearing short skirts and carrying coffee. He drank 8 or 10 cups of coffee in that afternoon. And I finally said to him, I said, do you have any side effects from this? And he was jittery like this. It wasn't because of my presence.
As you mentioned, many of the risk factors associated with heart disease are what you call social class problems or related to income. In addition to bad habits, lower income people tend to have little access to quality medical care. Could you give us your view of the relationship of lack of access to quality medical care and heart disease in America?
Well, that's sort of a loaded question in this respect. Depends on which part of the country you're in terms of that. The magnitude of the problem of distribution of proper care for the 35 million people who are underserved at the present time, that's well recognized. The obesity, the smoking, the facts that the social classes, in fact, Stunkard, a professor from the University of Pennsylvania, did studies on obesity. There's more obesity in America in the lower social classes than the upper social classes. That is not due to access to medical care. It can read and write. Or, for example, in running and jogging, It's a rare thing to find some of the minority people. To run doesn't take very much. I'm talking in terms of equipment. There are a lot of behavioral things on a mass scale. In essence, there has to be societal action. The medical profession bears a certain responsibility. I was going to use the word certain guilt in terms of access of care in opposition to a better health care availability system. But the big problem today is not the mortality rate from high blood pressure, for example, is not due to the lack of access to care. My wife works as a doctor who works in the inner city, and whether it's at Huff Norwood or other places like that, and it's hard to get people who are worried about food tomorrow to be concerned about taking a drug to treat high blood pressure. The beneficial effects of treatment may not be apparent for 10 years. The urgency of the economics of a house, of a job, of home far outweighs the activity toward prevention. So yes, I think medical care should be more accessible, particularly to people who are called disadvantaged. But a big part is public education. Mr. Taft was just talking about funds for education, etc. It's important that we have more monies available for education of all of our citizens throughout the country, not that Shaker Heights or Orange Village or Cleveland Heights would spend twice as much as the inner city, because this is a behavioral problem. The treatment, the control, for example, of typhoid fever, of diarrheas, stem basically from teaching people to wash their hands. So there are elementary things that should be done at the person level. So I deplore the lack of care, and the most important part is the willingness to enter into the care system, because many of these people are overwhelmed by the social and economic problems of everyday existence.
Doctor, I think most of us know what the problems are and what we should be doing, but find ourselves on what I call a roller coaster, where you lose weight, gain it, exercise more, stop exercising as much. I would suggest the problem is not only in the stomach but in the mind. What can you do to get on the right course and stay on it?
Well, first of all, you have to appreciate, you should say you have to enjoy life. Do you enjoy living and loving and working? The answer is yes. In fact, in German, there's an expression that says, with proper German accent, jedes Mensch hat das Schlüssel von sein eigenes Schicksal, which says every person has the key to their own destiny. Don't blame anybody else. And I bring up the importance of the nuclear family, of mama and of papa, and of peer pressures, of peer activities. And the point is, you may need help. Some people find they have to go out to a very elegant place. I remember giving a talk out in the West Coast, out in Arizona, and paid $2,500 for a 5-day stay to be brainwashed, to defatted, desmoked, exercise, stress management, etc. And that's all right for a few people. But the point is, how do you enter into a system? If you need help, join a help. There are support groups, just like there are support groups for people who are habitual gamblers or child abusers or whatever the other thing is. No, it has to be a public health thing. In this roller coaster business you mentioned, up and down, there are many people who have lost several tons of weight and regained it. And that's not the answer. So you need support group, and the place to start first with yourself. Look at yourself in the mirror and say, who am I? What am I? Do I have control of my destiny? When I feel like eating like a pig or a hog, can I find alternatives? Do I understand why I use food as a way of escaping from the realities with which I can't cope? These are important things. It's interesting, obesity is not a problem in Ethiopia. It's not a problem in Chile. It's not a problem in Cyprus. Others, we have such access. I personally would like to have some bright young man or woman have a device by the refrigerator, and you have an type of IBM card, and you stand on a scale, and before that thing will open, it reads you and says, no, not today. Or you can...
Dr. Hellerstein, I can understand how exercise is important in an overall life pattern because it does use up calories and it helps keep you from being too fat. But I wonder, I don't think I've ever understood how exercise itself, just using the big muscles of the body could have some direct effect on the health of your heart. Is there any direct connection there, or is it indirect through your sort of overall body size and tone?
Mr. Taft, thank you for this question. My associates and I and others have done studies. Exercise training, it does not have to be marathon running. For those people who are 50, 60, or 70, walking 2 or 3 or 4 miles a day at average pace is enough. What exercise does, it increases what is called fibrinolysis. It's a material that causes blood to dissolve clots. 2 is it causes the total cholesterol to go down and the good cholesterol called HDL cholesterol to increase. In addition to that, it increases the enzyme capabilities of the skeletal muscles, so the muscle is able to take up more oxygen per unit passage. More importantly, it changes even such things as the intraocular pressure in the eyes. It changes the hearing acuity, and I don't know whether this is important in this group, it even enhances sexual activity within the constellation. And it has effects on catecholamines. It's been shown that it decreases depression, and it does this on a biochemical basis. It's not all in the mind as an ethereal thought. There are basic biochemical changes that are taking place with exercise. Let me just point out, 800 years ago, our program was described in a book written called The Preservation of Youth. It was written by Maimonides for the Sultan of Egypt, and his program was exercise daily to the point of breathlessness, which we know is called the anaerobic threshold. Avoid fatty meats. Don't eat fish from polluted rivers. The bread should be coarse and not refined, and avoid obesity. And he pointed also the time to exercise the early day. And he said, I will not extol the value of a little wine because the Muslims were against wine at that time, against alcohol at that time. His program was written 800 years ago, and he understood the physiology, but we have described the physiology. Exercise to the point of breathlessness. All fatty substances are bad. Last but not least, he wrote, all cheeses are bad except that cheese which is white and sweet and not more than 24 hours old. Which cheese is that? Cottage cheese. 800 years ago.
Very much. Just move your light. Thank you, and welcome, Mrs. Hellerstein. We're happy to have you with us today as well. The forum is adjourned.
Will burning garbage to make energy help alleviate our landfill crisis or cause more air pollution? Join us for this town hall meeting live debate, including your chance to participate. Monday night at 10 on WVIZ.
Transmission of today's programs is made possible by members of TV 25 and the following.
The Huntington National Bank, the personal bankers. Each and every customer is assigned a personal banker because the Huntington takes your banking needs personally. Member FDIC.
And Alpha Park, a high-technology complex housing 120 companies.
What is it, Starlight Express? Is that the big box office blockbuster on Broadway now?
The huge smash on
Let's
Broadway.
do one of the uptunes from that. Here we go. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Hope you enjoyed that at home. Thank you. You know, I was going to sing a little something, but I'm worried because I think I caught a really awful cold last night, and it's my own dumb fault. Well, I know, but wait till you hear how this happened, and then I think you'll change your idea about this. It's my own fault, this cold. I went down to the local country club last night. I got really drunk. I went down to the local country club, and then I stole a golf cart and drove it into the lake. So it's my... Here's an interesting fact, kind of a fun fact, kind of a brain teaser. No, more of a fun fact. Every 10 minutes in this country, a guy puts a piece of paper into a tackle shop suggestion box that reads, "Lower prices on trout lures." Did you know that? I mean, let me show you something. Let me show you something, ladies. See this? And I think we all know what that means. It means I'm 41 and I can't tie a tie is what that means. Whoa, thank you. Let's see. I thought this was kind of bizarre. The makers of Spam announced earlier today that as of March 1st, they will be permanently closing down their meat plant and going into the lingerie business. So that's going into the lingerie business, March 1st. You know, ladies and gentlemen, yesterday a Bronx kindergarten student, did you read about this, took a loaded gun to school, and I guess on the same day a Bronx junior high teacher was arrested with 8 vials of crack. You know, when you think about it, maybe it's not such a bad idea to drop out of a New York City school, because kind of a smudge there on the actual lens. Let me get that off. I hope I don't scratch that. Hi, welcome back. Boy, this is a pretty good show here. We have Sam Donaldson from ABC News is with us. And Keenan Ivory Wayans is here. And also, this is pretty exciting, an art demonstration with the lovely Connie Gordon. Now, kids, here's the lovely Paul Schaefer right over there. The lovely Paul Schaefer.
Thank you very much. Boy, that is a swinging polka dot tie you have. Are you dressing like the members of the hip British group ABC?
Uh-huh.
I thought so. What are you looking for, David?
Scissors.
Something you need to fix?
Scissors. I'm going to make a little adjustment here on the tie.
Get you some scissors.
We don't have any scissors. Are there scissors on the way? Yeah. Or like a loaded revolver, I could shoot it off? Hi, welcome to the program. We got a pretty exciting show for you. Hi, thank you very much. Thanks, Barbara. Barbara Gaines, ladies and gentlemen. Okay. I almost feel like there should be a rabbi here. But maybe not. Maybe not. Let's just, what we need to do is just even it up. Tonight will be, ladies and gentlemen, our third night for Al Marr's Box O' Thrills. Is that what it is, Al? Box O' Thrills?
Third night.
It's not Big Box, it's just Box O' Thrills.
Box O' Thrills.
Thrills or Trills?
Thrills.
Thrills. and the idea here, Al, is every night there's a little pleasant surprise loaded up in there in the box for us.
Made especially for you.
Thank you very much. And then you trigger it, is that right?
I trigger it.
Okay, here we go. Last night we had, what did we have last night?
Last night we had bouncing balls.
Uh-huh. And the night before?
We had sponges.
Right. And when was it ball bearings? It's just a joke.
We don't want to talk about that.
We don't want to talk about that. Okay, here we go. Ready, Anton? Oh, should I move or duck? What?
Duck.
Duck? I
duck.
Duck. How do I duck out here? Go ahead, Al. Do it. You know, I must say, Al, of the three, this is my least favorite, the socks.
Is that right?
I like the sponges pretty well because they were damp and I could fling them into the audience.
Well, most of these were clean, though.
I know, most were clean, Al. Thank you very much. Which is more than you can say for yourself, I know. All right, Al, we'll look forward to that tomorrow. Do we have it? You want to see it in replay? I don't know. Do you want to see it in replay? All right, here it is. Al Marr's Box of Thrills, socks. Also, last night the Russian hockey team was supposed to be here. They did not show up tonight. I understand, unless he's making this up, we have a member of the New York Rangers hockey team with us. Is this actually true, sir? He's up there somewhere. His name is what? Maury Povich. Brian?
Rudy Poshak.
Rudy Poshak.
Yeah.
The audience goes crazy for guys named Rudy. Have you noticed that? How you set for socks, Rudy?
I'm set perfectly fine.
All right,
okay.
good for you. Nice to have you here.
Thank
you know, have you heard anything about this Bud Bowl? Are we all fairly sick of the discussion of the Bud Bowl? I had no idea what it was. It's supposedly some kind of commercial promotional device that will take place during the Super Bowl on NBC, I believe, and it's sponsored by the major brewery of this country, Anheuser-Busch. And last night on the program, Bob Costas explained to us what it is. It's an actual cartoon animated football game featuring bottles of beer. We're very near the end of civilization, ladies and gentlemen. And this will be played in 3 installments or 4 installments, like it makes a difference, during the Super Bowl. And I think you can actually wager on the outcome of this nonsense. So anyway, that's what the Bud Bowl is. And we have some connections in sports. We were able to get a little sample, a few seconds, to show you now. You weren't really going to see this before the Super Bowl. Here now is what Bud Bowl 1 will look like when you see it during the Super Bowl. And there it is right there. It's just the Bud Light.
It looks like we're ready for the kickoff of Bud Bowl 1.
You can't beat that 8th grade comedy, can you? Bud Bowl 1, Paul.
Yeah. Nice to be right on the 50-yard line for that game.
Oh, sure would be. Hey, it'd be nice to be on the 50-yard line for anything, huh?
Well, I suppose so. You know what's so terrible? I realized just before we went on the air, America has been watching us age for the past 7 years. Isn't that a terrible thought?
Well, I don't know.
I don't have anywhere
can
to
you do
go
about it? It's better than them not watching us do anything, isn't it?
I suppose that's true, too. Yes, as a matter of fact. I'm sorry I brought it up.
Why are you feeling your shirt over there?
It's a cute little nervous habit I've developed doing a thing like that.
It's warm in here, though, don't you think?
Yeah.
Yeah, this
Tonight
is the
I have
time of
to
year
review
when I pick up my spirits every day by saying, oh, it's spring-like.
Yeah.
Spring-like.
Tonight I must agree with you.
Spring-like. Yeah, except that normally, like this morning, it was 10 degrees and we had freezing rain. Let's do our top 10 list tonight. Am I wrong, Paul, or at one time during the Reagan administration, didn't they have a free socks program?
I believe, yes.
Or was it cheese? Can't remember.
I think it was just say socks.
All right, it was the ill-fated free socks program. Oh, this again. Boy, do I hate that. Oh, I can't. Here's our top 10 category tonight. This is a pretty good one, ladies and gentlemen. This is top 10 headlines in the Soviet Enquirer. You're familiar with the United States publication, the National Enquirer? These are the headlines that would appear in the Soviet version of that newspaper, the Soviet Enquirer. Here we go. Number 10, ghost of Elvis spotted for 3rd time in line for bacon. Number 9, distraught hotel manager. My rooms still smell like Billy Joel. Number 8, informing on your neighbor can increase your lifespan. Number 7, gaining weight is a cinch with potatoes and vodka diet. Number 6, Cher's so-called perfume is nothing but Soviet tractor fuel. Number 5, a Russian woman wins Miss Universe pageant, for all you know. Number 4, why everybody hates Judd Hirsch. Number 3, KGB mind control works. Bush picks quail. Number 2, Gorbachev's spot moves to other side of head. Well, that certainly would be a stunning revelation in any publication, regardless of nationality, race, color, or creed. Number 1, the top 10 headline in the Soviet Enquirer, psychics warn Yakov Smirnov may return. ladies and gentlemen, I'm gonna ask you to form 2 lines in an orderly fashion. Come down and pick up your free socks. This is a pretty good show, as I mentioned. Sam Donaldson is here, Keenan Ivory Wayans, and also Connie Gordon. Did I get it right? Wayans, that's good enough. We'll be right back, folks.
Holiday greetings from Budweiser. The people who bring you Budweiser wish you and yours the very best of everything this holiday season.
Enjoy extra sugar-free gum.
You get extra flavor, extra fun in extra sugar-free gum.
The long-lasting sugar-free gum is extra with NutraSweet for extra refreshing flavor that lasts an extra, extra, extra long time.
Extra flavor for that extra long class. Extra flavor for that extra long task. When you're chewing extra, the extra fresh flavor lasts an extra, extra, extra long time.
Extra lasts extra long.
Leftovers. I hate leftovers. You know why they're called leftovers, Helen? Because they're left over. Oh, what? Oh, leave those here. We ought to have leftovers more often. Broccoli? I can't eat broccoli. I hate broccoli. I won't eat it. No, wait a minute. I like broccoli. Maybe it was cauliflower I didn't like. Meatloaf?
Single?
Uh-oh.
Try the Zappa Pack. It's Cheese Whiz for one. Cheese Whiz changes everything.
It's here, winter time at the Chevy Network. 10 great days of savings that will make a winner out of you. Let's get to the point. Right now, get a sporty Chevy Cavalier with 5-speed and fuel injection for as low as $79.50 after cash back. Or a new Chevy Lumina rated most trouble-free in its class by J.D. Power and Associates for as low as $12,405 after cash back. So what's the point in waiting? Winter time ends January 7th. To be a winner, see a winner. Your Chevy Network dealer. In Ohio, nobody beats the heartbeat.
Okay. Thank you very much. Welcome back to the program. I'm really a little despondent because of this suit.
Oh, the suit looks lovely.
I hate this suit.
What is the matter with that?
Well, I have to wear it because we do this little phony thing later in the show where you think I'm somewhere else, but I never really even leave the desk. But it's like the Father Knows Best suit. What's his name? Robert
Young.
Robert Young would wear this suit.
It does remind me a little bit of Robert Young.
Yeah, but it's spring-like in here, don't you think?
But Robert Young didn't have the tailored look that suit has.
Well, I have to sew off my own ties, so what does that mean? You know, kids, when President Reagan returns to California, the Golden State, he won't miss battling the deficit, the winter weather in Washington, and he won't be missing my first guest shouting, Mr. President. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome ABC's chief White House correspondent, Sam Donaldson. It's just about the same suit. Yeah. Nice to have you here. Do you buy your own clothes? Does ABC News buy them for you?
I buy them right off the rack.
You did a pretty nice job with that one.
Well, 2 years ago I did a nice job, but I've sort of filled out since.
Oh, no, you look great. You look like you're in the top physical condition of your life.
Thank you. Could you be my publicist? How have you been, David?
Pretty good. Now, you've been the chief White House correspondent for how many?
12 years.
12 years. So
Noon on the 20th, it'll have been 12 years.
12 years. And that's 2 different administrations, right?
Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan.
Yeah. Well, which of the 2 did you enjoy the most?
Well, I enjoyed them both.
Yeah.
I'm going to duck that question. I mean, Jimmy Carter let you do something every day. Almost every working day of his presidency, except toward the end when the hostage crisis sort of made him hunker down, reporters got to see him and talk to him. I cannot say the same thing about Ronald Reagan.
Right. Now, does it say anywhere on any document, any piece of paper, that a president has got to stop and talk to the reporters?
Absolutely not. But I think it doesn't do anyone good if the president doesn't let people know what he's doing and thinking, and assuming he is thinking, and planning. And it's not a question of reporters' rights. I've got no right to question the president, but the people of the United States have sort of a right to know what this guy is doing back there.
Yeah.
You don't just elect someone and say, now go off and do anything you want. Before you know it, he'll go on to Bitburg, he'll sell arms to the Ayatollah. I mean, he'll do things that are nutty.
Yeah.
So,
Nutty.
you know,
That Iran deal was nutty, wasn't it?
well, yeah, it sort of was, I think. And the president, I believe, regrets it.
But you know how I perceive this is whenever you see President Reagan going to or from the helicopter or getting in and out of a limousine or going to the White House or whatever, and reporters, yourself and others, are asking him questions off mic, it looks like, and I know this is not fair to say about him, but he's the one who brings it to mind, it looks like he's being evasive or doesn't want to confront an issue.
No.
Yeah, that's my
Hey, David. You mean you think that the fact that reporters were kept about 50 yards away was an oversight? And next Monday, in the last 5 days of his presidency, someone's going to wake up and say, gee, you know, all these years, let's move these guys right up front. They did it deliberately.
Now you're changing jobs. You will not be the chief White House reporter?
Oh, as Brother Jesse would say, I hope to go on to higher ground.
And
well, I've been there 12 years, and it's really too long. I'm delighted I was there. I thank Roone Arledge and ABC for giving me the opportunity. But having said that, it's time for someone like Britt Hume, who's going to replace me, to be there and reinvent the wheel. And then I want to go on and... when's your contract up? I want to go and do something else. And I think I'll have a chance at ABC. We're going to start a new primetime show, and I hope to have the chance to work on it.
I want to talk about that in a second. But is it considered that the White House correspondent job is the plum of the network aside from evening anchorman?
Well, it's always been a prestige assignment because you're so visible. Every night, almost, particularly in a new administration, you're out on the North Lawn talking. And people, of course, pay attention to what you say, not because you're anybody, you're not, but
you're
because...
right there.
And the president, they either love him or they hate him. And if they love him and you say one bad word against him, of course, they hate you.
You're standing on the lawn of the White House.
You are.
And at any minute, a window might open and someone would scream, "Get off our lawn, Sam." Nancy might do
that
that.
almost happened.
Really?
Yeah, well, we used to, in the Carter administration, the lawn would slope down to the press room, and then it would end with pavement, and people would go out and sun themselves. Not in the winter, but in the summer. And you couldn't be seen from Pennsylvania Avenue. It wasn't that you were cluttering up the lawn. But Mrs. Reagan, according to the story, looked out the window early on and said, well, who are these guys down there? And before we knew it, there was an ivy bed and a chain link fence. It's hard to sun yourself if you're
in the ivy.
In the ivy bed.
Yeah.
So that stopped.
She put a halt to that.
Yeah.
So the new show is going to be you and now Chris Wallace. Is he involved in that show?
Absolutely. I mean, Chris
now,
was
he
hired...
used to be here at NBC, and then one morning I picked up the newspaper, and he's at ABC. So what happened there?
Well, I'll have to let Chris speak for himself.
Sam, if anybody knows, you know.
Well, we're delighted to have Chris.
Yeah, but what happened? Did something go wrong here at NBC?
No, I don't know. I mean, I really don't.
Yeah.
Chris, we made him an offer.
Right.
And I sat down with him a couple of times, but it was really Roone, I think, who talked to Chris.
He's Mike Wallace's son, you know.
No. Yeah, but may I say something about that?
I don't know what I'm doing anymore.
I want to get serious for a moment. Chris Wallace is Mike Wallace's son. He's proud of it.
Right.
But he has earned his stripes.
Oh,
no one that I know of says, well, Chris Wallace is only there because of Mike.
No, I didn't mean to
suggest that. He's a good reporter, and he pays his dues, and his reputation is such that if he were, Chris Smith, he'd be our chief correspondent.
Yeah. But I just meant to...
I don't know a guy named Smith.
Yeah, but I think it's a real loss for NBC, is what I was saying.
I agree, but again, I'm going to let Chris. You invite Chris on.
This wasn't part of that baseball deal, was it? Where we lost. We have to do a commercial, and then we'll return here with Mr. Donald.
When you're out street hiking, you better know how to read the terrain. Do your best to preserve the wildlife, because street hikers don't just walk, they hike.
Fresh news, Joe.
Introducing new Fresh Mint Gum, the freshest mint. The coolest cool. That's quite a package. New Fresh Mint from Trident.
When the cold medicine isn't NyQuil, you could be suffering all night and miserable in the morning. Why wake up like this with ordinary medicine when you can wake up like this with NyQuil? Once you know what NyQuil can do, nothing else will do.
Something big is happening in daytime television, and it's really picking up steam. It's simply smashing. If you haven't seen the Joan Rivers show lately, oh, you haven't seen Joan Rivers, you might say she's on a roll.
Oh, grow up! Hit it, Spike.
Joan Rivers, she's breaking new ground in daytime television.
Weekday mornings at 9 on Channel 3.
Cliché, an overused expression. Example.
Tonight, I'm really gonna get plastered. I can't wait to really get ripped.
I'm gonna get smashed.
First thing I do after I graduate is get trashed.
Avoid the cliché. Don't drink and drive.
All right, Sam, we have the Rangers media guide right here. Rudy Poshek is, in fact, a member of the New York Rangers Hockey Club.
Right there, Rudy. He doesn't look a thing like Maury Poshek.
He looks